My name is Shaad Vayej. I'm an attorney practicing in South Africa, and I've focused on the cannabis industry for the past 5 years. I'm also, well, I don't know if you want me to go into the only farms and what we invited to the Phakisa for and that kind of thing.
Well, let's go into that right now. So we know that government is considering these ways now to be able to streamline the final implementation of what it states legally within a draft bill or whatever legislation that Parliament's cooking up, to have it finally in black and white, and in within the Constitution that says, hey, you know what? These are the laws that comes to marijuana at the end of the day, because there's still a lot of wiggle room, gray areas at the moment as government tries to consolidate what type of market is available. Of course, as you understand, you've just been recently invited last month to the specific talk shop that government had put together on finding ways to streamline the legalities and the decriminalisation of the use of marijuana in South Africa. What was your big takeaway from that event, and what stuck with you?
So for me, Phakisa in Sesotho means hurry up, and so this activity brought together, this action lab brought together key players, legal experts, stakeholders in the industry to secure sort of policy coherence and discuss like time-bound activities across multiple departments, government departments. And likely the resolutions that were adopted at the Phakisa are set to sort of shape the future of the South African cannabis industry going forward. So for me, the most striking feature of this Phakisa was that it was inclusive in nature and collaborative in format. The representatives from industry, labor, legal, traditional community leaders, along with senior government and key decision makers, when they were brought together and aligned on the sort of the common objective of rapidly enabling and mobilizing the lawful industrialization and commercialization of cannabis, to me, the most striking feature was that it was amazing to get everybody's minds moving towards one goal. It wasn't necessarily one of an educational, workshop format, but more of an immediate next steps action plan.
And of those immediate next step action plan, what was the big takeout from that? There still seems to be a big question mark about how long or how far along the lawmakers in our country have managed to get in terms of drawing up these final cannabis master plans. We know that the Western Cape government has done one of their own. What are we seeing in terms of parliament? I know you're not a parliamentarian yourself, but what was the idea that you got from this specific talk shop in terms of what the next steps are practically?
So, while I can't comment on behalf of the government, but what I can say is that we are, while it's not an excuse for the sort of long-term delays that we've experienced thus far, the legislative process in general is a slow-moving one, and that's because we have public commentary and consultation, and especially where the topic matter is as sort of far-reaching and nuanced as the cannabis legalization question, it has to be done quite carefully. So where we're at right now, and from the feedback from the Phakisa is that the most advanced bill dealing with cannabis at the moment is the Cannabis for Private Purposes bill, and by advanced I simply mean in stage of consideration. However, that bill doesn't necessarily deal with the commercialization of cannabis. So there does need to be interim measures that are put in place in order to facilitate the industrialization of cannabis, and that is something that is strongly being considered, and how best to achieve that in an accelerated format rather than a long drawn out parliamentary process of amending bits of legislation and so forth. So we are going to see a lot more focus on the Cannabis for Private Purposes bill in the immediate future, with a broader understanding of how to carefully roll out this industry so as to protect market participants, to include traditional cultivators, traditional communities, and traditional leadership communities in the rollout of this plan going forward.
And I'm deviating a little bit from the prepared questions, but forgive me. What is, obviously one of the key things as to your presence there was the question around the legalities of it right now. I mean, as we stand, update us, we're still basically sitting with the same sort of parameters that were set out by that initial High Court judgment in 2018, right?
Indeed, and that High Court judgment simply covers private use of cannabis. So as it stands, it still remains unlawful to buy and sell cannabis except under license or permit. Those licenses are currently in terms of the Medicines Act. The permits for hemp cultivation are in terms of the Plant Improvement Act, but there isn't sufficient coherence on the hemp side of things, especially because of the between the Medicines Act and the Drugs Act. The Drugs Act makes no mention of and makes no mention of the Plant Improvement Act. So there's some legislative sweeping up that needs to take place. But where we currently stand is, it is we have the judgment is to rely upon, and that is for private purposes. So private adults in their private capacity may consume cannabis privately for their personal consumption. And where the next steps need to be is that we have to look at how it is that we onboard rural cultivation, outdoor cultivation, for use maybe not necessarily in the medical value chain, but in the industrial value chain. And that's for use in textiles, paper, plastics, biofuel, and all the other sort of recorded uses of hemp and the jobs that it creates and the sort of income that it promises for the industry and for the country at large. It's that latter step of regulating that industrialization that we don't yet have in place, and that we have to strongly and carefully consider going forward.
And were there any sort of dates bandied about, or the idea of timeframes as to which they want to get to that sort of final endpoint? Because that would obviously, the commercialization of that would obviously have to be in line with legislation that would then, put South Africa on the map in that regards, and then also make it just easier for the layperson who wants to take part in, the herb for whatever reason. It would allow them to do so as well. Any time spans?
As much as we'd all love a nice, clear starting gun within which to participate in the industry, unfortunately there wasn't any sort of very clear dates in mind. However, there are actions and action of let's say policy actions and actions within the different government departments that have been put to timelines. There are various timelines for various actions. Some actions need to take a bit longer because of the planning and so forth that's required, and some can be immediately done. But what I can say is that it is an accelerated time frame. We're looking at this year, and over the next 4 months. What that entails is obviously it's a fluid situation. It depends on the consideration of the Cannabis for Private Purposes bill, and there are, let's say, a lot of moving parts. So I wouldn't want to create any unnecessary expectations around time.
And then in the meantime, probably my second last question, Shaad. I mean, given the big question marks still over the 2018 judgment, given the time it's taken, the pandemic, and everything else in between, I mean, 2018 up until now, help me do the math quickly. We're basically sitting, it's pushing 6 years later. Have you seen an increase in the number of sort of day-to-day, person-by-person cases involving which speaks to the big sort of question mark over the lack of clear cannabis laws in South Africa? Are you seeing that there's an increase in these particular cases, perhaps someone being arrested for being over a certain gram amount, and so they're held in custody for a day or the weekend, and then suddenly they have, like, for example, a bad experience behind bars, and then they would want to challenge this because they were arrested for the possession of dagga, for example? Do you see a lot of these things now?
Well, increasingly less arrests for possession of cannabis, more arrests for dealing in cannabis. What those stats are, I can't speak to exactly on increases, but what I can say is that what was secured at the Phakisa was that the cannabis it's intended to be descheduled or taken out of the Drugs Act. And that that is something that the Cannabis for Private Purposes bill has always intended to do, and that is something that would take it out of the realm of criminality in that regard.
And that might, and you're saying that timeline might happen this year.
It may happen this year. If all goes according to plan and there aren't any sort of holdups within the passing of the Cannabis for Private Purposes bill for whatever reason, then we are looking at an accelerated timeline that may well be this year. However, when it comes to the arrests for possession, the NPA in the not NPA, the SAPS confirmed that they would issue a directive which stems the arrest for possession of, or purely for possession of cannabis, over the next while. A general circular is to be issued, and that is something that the presidency has also confirmed in their statement.
But I mean, this is early days. Final question. I mean, certainly government is eyeing this industry as under the Ramaphosa administration, given everything that we're seeing in the country at the moment with high joblessness, an economy that's only really growing at about 0.1, 0.2% at best, high inflation, youth joblessness is through the roof, soaring crime rate. This is definitely a sector that is untapped source of major wealth, right?
Absolutely, absolutely, and government fully appreciates that. That this is a massive high growth key priority or priority sector going forward, purely because of the impact that it can have on jobs, on infrastructure development, and on potentially even affecting food security and energy independence. It's a very widespread and far-reaching industry. There is also incredible demand internationally for South African cannabis, whether it be on the medicinal side of cannabis, which is already active and is currently has been underway since about 2017, to the industrial products that can be developed from it. We also have a lot of domestic demand, things everything from housing all the way down to carbon offsetting, carbon sequestration, phytoremediation of polluted soils. These are all things and problems that hemp can address, as well as inclusion of rural communities and creating jobs in agriculture once again. So this is a key focus for the government, and we can quite clearly see that they are now, given with the actions taken under the Phakisa, adopting an accelerated approach to realizing that commercialization and industrialization in the nearby future.
Shaad, anything else that you would like to share? Anything else that perhaps I may have missed in my questioning? Anything you want to share on top of your mind? Something you might be passionate about?
Well, it's the inclusion of rural farmers. We as much as everybody would love to have wholesale cannabis lawfully, we really have to look at how we roll this industry out so as to be inclusive and to properly realize the transformative nature that this industry can have on our society. And what I mean by that is we also have to take into account the experience of other countries who have also gone down this road internationally. The role of market economics in making available certain or increased supply without taking care of the demand side of the economy. And that's something that we need to focus on quite carefully over the next while, is that, we cannot sit on a supply glut. We need to have demand pathways within which the supply needs to go to. And establishing a thriving domestic cannabis economy is ideal, and it's imperative, and we need to start to look at how we do that. How do we transition people from the illicit market into the licit market? Are we going to consider things like amnesty periods? What is the fastest way to rapidly mobilize the existing industrial or existing infrastructure in cannabis to become legal and to become compliant? And that is the approach going for. That is what we need to really strongly look at going forward. And approach it with a level of understanding that we can't wash all the dishes in the sink all at once. We have to wash one dish at a time so that we get through it all.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Shaad. I really appreciate you. I appreciate your time. Continue in this space. I'm sure you're going to be